I mean, my fundamental belief, particularly in small businesses, we can do a lot more than we think. And the problem is when you have a small business setting, well, even larger business, but setting realistic goals, it's what kills most businesses. Because the thing is, when you have a business with 3, 4, 5 people, you can grow a lot more than you expect.
Welcome to the Location Independent Startup Show. Here we discuss business, lifestyle design, personal development, and much more with some very special guests and experts who have been there and done that. Learn how to live life on your terms with me as your host, British entrepreneur and investor, John Cavendish. Okay, so welcome back to the Location Independent Startup Show. On this episode, I have my friend Mads Singers. Mads has been a management coach for over 7 years, and he's coached people in large organizations such as Shell and Coca-Cola, and worked with entrepreneurs in many small companies, including some of my friends and myself. I've also taken his management course, which I'd highly recommend. And I wanted to invite Mads on today to show that hiring and managing is something that most of us will, have to deal with, and that it's not as scary and painful as it can be. It doesn't have to be that scary and painful, because I know I've personally lost a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of heartache through hiring people and not managing them properly. And, I wouldn't say that I'm an amazing manager, but I think through Mads' course, I've definitely learned a lot. So yeah, welcome, Mads.
Thank you very much. That was a good introduction.
Thanks a lot. I mean it though. I've shared it with all my staff, and it's been something that everyone's taken some real things away from.
Yep.
So yeah, thanks, Mads. So yeah, whereabouts in the world are you now?
I am in Vietnam, Saigon, more specifically, enjoying a corona-free world. So.
Yeah, it's great. I'm also in Vietnam, so we're called the Location Independent Startup Show. So I like to ask people where they're based. But I mean, the perfect thing about our businesses is that we can operate from anywhere, isn't it?
Definitely, and particularly in these Corona times, and it becomes a lot more beneficial. So yeah.
Thanks. So really, what I wanted to go to today, I was thinking about what we could talk about, and what we usually talk about is the journey and the cycle of belief. Because I kind of feel like belief is the first step before getting a real business and then getting into a good business model. So there are some models which you can scale very easily and some models which can't really scale. So we'll go into that a bit later. But what I thought one thing we could dive into was kind of the evolution of a business in management structure.
Yeah.
Because I know me personally, the first person I hired was a generalist, and I tried to teach them absolutely everything from the ground up, which made them irreplaceable, underpaid, and as crazy as me, because I'm not the most organized person.
Yeah.
So I really like your input on that, and kind of who you think should be the first hire and how you should go about actually expanding a business.
Yeah. So I would say generally when you're looking at a first hire in a business, right? First of all, let me work a little bit on some fallacies. So first of all, everyone's like, oh yeah, just hire a cheap VA. And sometimes that can be the right solution for you, but it's not always the case. So what I encourage people to do is when they're looking for the first employee is really to look around, and it comes down to delegation a lot. So it comes down to looking at, what is the stuff you're really good at and excelling at? What are the stuff you're struggling with? And what are the things that, you're spending a lot of time on that you perhaps could hire someone to do? So generally, when I'm looking at a new business, that's how I look at it. And I'm looking at, should the first person I hire be someone who replace majority of what I'm doing? So for example, let's do some specific examples here so it makes sense for people, right? So let's say, you probably have people in all different niches. Let's say I'm a web developer, right? Now, I could hire someone else to do the web development, the website building, etc., right? And basically replace me doing that. Now, I could hire a salesperson because I'm good at web development and, I'm not good at sales. Now, the challenge here is, and a lot of people go down this route and hire a salesperson or try to hire a salesperson, that the challenge is that is really difficult until you're very, very clear on your value proposition. If you're just selling websites like 8 billion other people on this planet that emails me every day, you're going to have a really hard time bringing in a sales guy and making them successful. right?
Hmm.
Like
I
if
agree
you
with
just
that.
bring in a random sales guy and say, hey, go sell on some websites, right? It's not going to work. Now, if you have a very, very crystal clear value proposition saying, we build website for dentists, and this is the price range. We're targeting dentists with only one location or dentists with multiple locations or whatever it is. But if you have a very, very specific niche, and ideally already have some case studies and so on, so that the salesperson will have a very specific target group to attack, then you're more likely to succeed. All right.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
But I'd go even further with that into if you don't even have a deck and if you never sold it yourself, to have a salesperson develop your entire sales process from zero to a functioning product is basically them doing all the business development in the business, isn't it?
Yeah. And that is not that's why I'm saying now realistically, if you are at the point where you can afford to hire someone, you probably have sold something yourself, because most people with zero money in the bank can't afford to do that, right? So
For sure.
my experience is that people have usually sold at least a little bit themselves. And again, if you haven't honed in, if you haven't figured out exactly who your key customer is, I would generally do that before you do any hiring, because that key customer might be like when you figure out who that is, that might be really important to what you're gonna deliver, right? And when I say hiring, like again, if you're a web dev, like you can outsource pieces of that work to freelancers, and I don't necessarily consider that hiring, right? When I'm saying hiring, I'm meaning people that you own and pay consistently, right? So, well, not own, but they work for you. They work for you, and you pay them consistently, right? So I think from that point of view, right? So as I said, either someone to replace what you're doing, someone to battle one of your weaknesses, or someone to focus in an area that's different than your strength. So examples could be, sometimes you have people hiring like a bookkeeper, or someone who is very good with customer service, or things that it's not, when you're starting, it's not necessarily the core, because often the core is sales and product initially. But it's one of those things that you might not want to spend a ton of time on customer service. You might not want to spend a ton of time on admin or whatever. The essence, though, when you're hiring people in a small business, you need to make it clear to them that it often becomes a role with multiple hats, because when you're hiring your first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people, majority of the time you will have to ask them to do things that are not their core competency, right? And therefore, I'm not saying hire a generalist. I always believe in hiring people that have a certain core strength that matches something that you're looking for. But really think about, where does it make the most sense to do this? Now, I just want to touch on something that's very common in the entrepreneurial online community. And that's the fact that people have always heard, you need to go figure something out, build a process around it, and then delegate it to someone else. Now, when you're the only person in the business, that might work, but it is what holds majority of my clients back, that they feel that they need to figure everything out and teach someone else to do it. And when you start getting a few employees, that mindset would significantly hinder your business growth, right? So the fundamental is, while you can do that with the first 1, 2, 3 employees, maybe really you want to get out of that mindset as soon as possible, and you want to give people ownership and responsibility. Now, I'm not saying if you hire someone and you have a ton of knowledge in your head, I'm not saying don't tell them what you know, right? That's just stupid if you don't. But the trap most people fall into is saying, let's say you have never done email marketing, right? You want to go to email marketing, but you don't know what to do. So, and most entrepreneurs in the online world, they're like, okay, I'll go figure out what to do, and I'll train someone to do it. Instead of giving that responsibility to either a new staff or one of your existing staff and say, hey, we need email marketing. You're good at writing, and you're fairly technical. Can you go figure this thing out? And you want to give them a project, you want to set some expectations, etc., but let them go figure it out, because that will free up your time to do the valuable stuff in the business, right? The stuff that makes a huge difference. And this is probably, for most of the clients I work with, this shift in understanding is probably the biggest change that really, really makes a difference for them.
So the big shift in understanding is actually realizing that the reason you hired this person is to be the brain behind the person. You're not just hiring them to enact a process that you designed, because at the end of the day, you know, we are not necessarily the best people to do everything in the business, because, you know, we're not the most talented, multi-skilled, multidisciplinary person in the world.
Yeah, and I think even though, because the challenge is, because we are entrepreneurs and we know our business really well, it is often faster for us to learn it than for someone else to learn it. But the key problem is, when you are the experts, you get all the questions. And one of the key things, every entrepreneur I work with, one of the first favorite things to do is ask them to open their Slack or their Skype or whatever they're using. And you'll literally just see blinking questions from all team members at all hours of the day. Like, hey, boss, what should I do here? Hey, boss, I did this thing. Is that correct? And like constantly all these blinking things. And that is not effective, right? So one of the key things, and I love showing humility when doing it. Like, I love going to someone and saying, hey, you know, I know absolutely nothing about email marketing. I suck at writing, and, you know, I'm not particularly technical. So, you know, John, I think you're amazing at writing, and I think you're fantastically technical. I want you to own this thing, right? Can you go away, do this project? Here's the time frame. Here's the goals. You know, go do it. And that difference, sort of longer term, is just, it makes such a difference in your business.
I agree. And when you said at the start that, you know, hiring people for your weaknesses and your limits, I think that's quite a vulnerable thing for a lot of people to do, especially when they start out in their business and they hire people like I did. I hired people like me, who have the same weaknesses. So maybe, you know, maybe these people can figure things out quickly, but they're not the best people at executing all day, every day. So I suppose my question there comes from, how do you give them these projects and then make sure that you follow up fully and properly and actually get the result? Because I've definitely been guilty in the past, when I started with new staff, of giving too many projects out and then not having proper control over what comes back before it gets shipped.
Yeah, so that, I mean, a couple of key things, and this is where it comes into personality a little bit, right? So I'm, as you know, through my course, I'm very, very big on personalities, and two key things: understanding yourself and understanding your staff, particularly staff who think very differently than yourself, is very important, right? So the key thing, generally, whenever you give someone a project, and on purpose, I said earlier, you want to give them a deadline or time frame, and you want to give them some specific goals. This is often the challenge. So people go to their staff and they're like, hey, can you do this project? Great. And in their mind, they expect, oh, well, those will probably take 1 week. They don't communicate that. And, you know, 6 months later, they're like still talking with the staff and like, so how are you doing on this project thing? And the staff member is still trying to figure things out and perfect it or whatever, right? So one of the key things is, if you set expectations, if you have expectations, sometimes you don't, but in most cases as an entrepreneur, you have expectations of how long this thing should take. You need to communicate that, right? And so some people are very good at following up. Some people are very good at setting deadlines. If you're not, there's a couple of tricks. One of them that is really good for people who generally struggle to follow up is do calendar invites. So if you actually give someone a deadline, when you do that, open your phone, put in a calendar invite, add them to the invite on the date and time it's due. To say, like, John, you know, I want you to work on this email thing. It will be due on August the 5th at 12 o'clock, right? Put in the calendar invite the person who is due, because what that does is it reminds both them and you that it's actually due, right? And that one, it means they're more likely to do it because they actually have a reminder in their calendar and they know you will see it. Two, it helps you actually remember to follow up and make sure it has been done, right?
Yeah, that's perfect. I could definitely do that, because I've fallen in the trap of using Trello too much and setting a load of deadlines. Then end up with a mess in Trello of all these different projects that don't get added to the calendar in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, So I also like project management tool, and I like Trello a lot. It can work in the same way. Um, what I have found is that some business owners have like 27 different boards with about 100 deadlines on each of them, and even when there is deadlines, they forget to follow up and so on. Obviously, it could be the same with your calendar. If you suddenly have 800 calendar reminder for deadlines, you might be like, yeah, I'll check in with that in a week or whatever, right? So it could also be problematic. But again, key thing is you probably shouldn't have that many follow-ups and deadlines. And yeah.
So yeah, another thing which I learned, one of my coaches in the past told me, was clarify and verify.
Yeah.
So we actually implemented that in my, when I had a bigger team last year, we did that all the time because it was a mess otherwise. So, clarify what I want to do, why it needs to be done for the business, and when it needs to be done by, and then actually get the person to repeat back to you.
Yeah.
It was so powerful because in reality, people don't hear what you say, do they? You realize that when people repeat back, either they hear the judgment in what you say, which is the worst one. If you're actually trying to give them some feedback, they hear the judgment being, you said that, I didn't do this, or something along those lines, or they just don't hear what you say. So that was been super powerful for me. Just 1, 2, 3. We even used to write out 1, 2, 3 to clarify like what it was, why it was, and when, and then send it back to each other because it was driving us crazy for a while. People not understanding what was going on.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think the methodology I've always used is who does what by when. And that's a little bit similar, but it doesn't have the middle point, right? But I think whenever you have meetings or whenever you have things, before you finish the meetings, make sure that it's clear what are the actions that are being taken, who is responsible for doing them, and by when, right? So that's a little bit similar. But yeah, I mean, the key thing for me, the problem is often you have a lot of meetings and, you talk with a lot of people and often deadlines get forgotten. So the key thing is to make sure you have a system where they're not, right? And I mean, this could also be ask your staff member, right? It could also ask your staff member to send a reminder email right now on your phone while you're talking with them, or on the computer right now when you're talking with them, of when the deadline is due and so on, right? I mean, in principle, it doesn't have to be you, but I think particularly for important things, I've definitely found that these calendar invites tend to work really, really well, right?
And I know you also touched on personality types. I don't want you to go deep into that now because I know you've got like a webinar for like an hour on personality types, which is awesome. And I'll link that underneath, and people can watch your webinar on disc profiles, which I really, really liked. So my next thing about the evolution of management, I guess, would be, okay, you've got your first 4 to 5 people. What do you do after that? Because, I've recently re-listened to the E-Myth, and the E-Myth talks all about you personally doing every single job in the business and then working your way up. And I understand how that works in a certain size, but after a while, if you haven't done that, how do you sort out the mess that you've created underneath yourself while trying to hire more people?
Yeah, so the key thing is when you're growing a business, fundamentally what you're doing is and again, just let's take what most people do and let's take what you should be doing. So again, what most people do is they become the spider in the middle. They hire a few people, everything goes down to the staff, and it runs back up to them to verify and check, right? The problem with that is, you can manage 3, 4, 5 people like that, and then you only work 80 hours a week, right? Fundamentally, that's not how to manage people. That is how you micromanage people, but it's not how you manage people. So the way you manage people is by giving them responsibility, giving them ownership, and really making sure that they know and understand what their goals are, right? So again, like we could go back to this example of email marketing that we used earlier, and I could say, John, going forward, I want you to own this email marketing piece, right? I want you to spend 1 month figuring out how to set it up and so on. And then ongoingly, I want to, I don't know, I'm making up some random goals, but let's say I want to make sure that we send, not send, that's not a very good term. I want to make sure that we make at least 3 sales from our emails on a monthly basis. And The goal is that we should spend a maximum of X amount of money doing that, right? So you normally always have to have two metrics, like sort of either quantity and quality or whatever, like with customer service. A lot of Amazon people, for example, they are like, you have to answer in 24 hours, which is key, but you also really want to make sure that it's good responses, right?
Yeah.
Because it's great if you answer within 24 hours, but if you're answering a pile of crap, then you're not doing really well, right? So for most roles, basically what you want to do is you want to give people a clear, the clear metric and clear expectation in terms of what they need to achieve. And rather than micromanage it, what you want to do is you want to make sure you get a good KPI on a weekly basis that actually show you those numbers, right? So for example, if we take Amazon customer service, you want to get a KPI every week that says, we had 80 emails last week. We answered within average of 2 hours, and the oldest one waited for 22 hours or whatever, right? So you want to have a clear KPI that basically that enables you to not have to sit and look at it every day, but you look at it frequently enough to understand that the person is doing a good job, and also that you're basically they understand the targets and they're very clear on the fact that no email should be there more than 24 hours. It's very important, but again, clarifying that and so on makes a ton of sense. So really, when you start doing that, when you start having key measures and when you start having KPIs in place, that enables you to let people own their piece of the business. And then you're just looking at these KPIs on a weekly basis. Now, if something goes wrong, which it does occasionally, you then want to talk with them and say, hey, John, we agreed that every email was answered within 24 hours. What happened? How did we have 2 emails last week that was not answered within 24 hours? And then, you get them to put in an action plan and saying, how are we going to avoid to make sure this doesn't happen in the future, right? So that's basically what you want to do. But that whole mindset of going away from this mindset of do it all yourself and give it to someone and move to this mindset of this needs to be done and I'm the least good person to do it. Who's the best person in the business, not me, who can do this job, right?
So they need KPIs.
Yeah.
So that'd be part of handing the job to them, would be to work with them to figure out the KPIs.
If you don't have them already, yes, you want to figure them out. So for example, if you're doing something brand new like email marketing, like you might not know what it is up front. Now, the one thing that's key when you're doing KPIs is doing what I call end of the line KPIs, right? A lot of time people just look at like, you should answer 50 emails every day. Now, the thing is, if 50 emails doesn't get you to the goal, that doesn't help you. Yeah. If you got 52 emails and that meant that 2 of them wasn't answered within 24 hours, that sucks. So you need to make sure, and I see this a lot with people doing outreach and the likes, and they set up a target, a KPI that's the number of emails being sent.
Yeah, outreach driven rather than results driven.
Instead of result driven. And the thing is, if you have a goal to send out 100 emails, like you can literally open the phone book and send out to the first 100 people. Now, if that doesn't give you a real result, you're not actually giving the person ownership, because I would much rather have they send 10 emails and get 2 good results than send out 100 and get 1. So the whole point by giving people clear ownership of what they're doing, what you're basically doing is you're enabling them to optimize the process. So you're giving them ownership and you're saying, this is what we do today. So right now we are sending out 100 emails and on average that give us, 2 replies a week or whatever. If you can find better ways of doing this that get us more end of the line results, that is excellent, right? Right. And the whole point is that what you want to go away from, and a lot of entrepreneurs also focus on time, and that's the same challenge, right? It's great if people work 40 hours a week, but if they're not giving you what you need, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
So the whole point is that you're looking for the right output that's going to move your business to the place that you want to be. You're not looking for the actual input per se, right? And sometimes you might have some roles where you can't get away from input because that is literally the only thing. But in many cases, like really try and look ahead and say, what is the end goal here?
So one question on that then, I suppose, is how do you record these KPIs and how do you track them?
Yeah, so I recommend having someone, which is not you, uh, putting them together on a spreadsheet on a weekly basis. Now, depending on what you do and so on, in some business areas, there's a ton of automatic reports and data and so on. Something like Google Data Studio is free to use, and they're in the world of SEO, for example, they're really good because they automatically tie in with analytics and they automatically tie in with Google Search Console and so on. But Google Data Studio is free to use, and I've been told not too complex. I have no idea, but I've been told not too complex. So that's something that could help. But I mean, in principle, even if it's a spreadsheet, again, like if you have a low wage employee that have to spend 1 or 2 hours every Monday going around finding a bunch of numbers, right? It doesn't cost you a ton of money, right? So get it done, right? It's going to help you because it's going to give you that overview that saves you the time of having to go do it, right?
Yeah, perfect. So I suppose another question around having the first 4 or 5 employees and growing from there. If you've got this down and you're actually hiring somebody who fulfills a need in the business that you can't fulfill yourself, how do you evaluate that person and not see them as like a god that can solve all of your problems? Because you're looking for this person because you're in pain, I imagine. And everyone seems more knowledgeable, or should be more knowledgeable than we are. So how do you decide this person's actually a competent individual?
The same way, you give them some clear goals and you see if they reach them. It sounds very simple, but fundamentally, that's what you're looking for, right? Now, if you're hiring a sales guy, or I mean, it could be anything else, but let's take a sales guy as an example. I would have a baseline target that's basically where he's at least paying his own salary, right? And I would say, the goal is we need to land at least 2 clients, generating us, I don't know, $5,000 a month, right? And if I know the guy's paying $4,000 a month, I know that if he hits the target, I'm not losing money from hiring. Now, you could then have some additional targets saying, if we hit 7.5K a month, you'll get a little bonus. And if we hit 10K a month, you'll get a little bit bigger bonus or whatever, right? But that's fundamentally how I try and work it. Now, obviously, sales is very straightforward ROI. Not all roles are like that, but I think that's generally the mindset. Like I even look at it and say, if you're doing it today, like let's say you're spending 20 hours doing something, what is that time worth? If you hire someone to do that, let's say part-time, or they might spend longer on you on it, but let's say they spend 40 hours a week or something doing this one task. Again, what's the value to you, and what is the output you need for it to work, right?
Yeah, and I guess with most businesses, businesses that are service-based or SaaS or this type of based business, not a product-based business, we all have to be sales-driven organizations. Like if we want to grow quickly, we need like to be sales, and then to get everything, a good quality product on the back end, but to be selling 24/7 because the only way of making money is to sell.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess the next step would be what happens after this. So I've never got that far. So what happens after 10, 15 employees? Like how do we actually how do you remain in control? And also how do you sleep? I suppose.
Sleep is overrated. Don't worry. No. So basically, there tend to be about 3 different steps from a managerial standpoint, right? So clients that come to me tend to be in one of these 3 steps. So the first step happens often between 10 to 15 people, where it's more than they can manage. And it's often because they haven't started developing leaders in the business and they're trying to manage 15 people by themselves, right? And that obviously just don't only give you gray hairs, that also give you no sleep. That's not a good idea. But that is the first scenario, right? So people haven't started developing management skill within their company. Now, between these 15 up to about 30 staff, there's sort of the second thing happened where you start having to rely on managers, but it's still not at the level where you're totally out of touch, because 30 people, you can still know them all. And, your aura is still all around the business, right? But when it starts to get to this around the 30 people, it's starting to be that breaking point. And again, like sometimes it varies, like some businesses maybe 40 or even 50 sometimes, but you start getting to that level where you need multiple layers under you, and you start getting to that level where, the let's call it the bottom of the company is basically so far away from you that they might not know you, and they might not talk with you regularly, and things like that. And that's usually sort of the 3 steps that companies go through, right? So again, getting out of the first step is really ensuring that you have managers in the business who can and do take ownership, and that are being managed through goals and clear targets, and are being managed by you through KPIs, mostly, right?
So helping them with goals and targets, I mean, do you follow like Traction or Gazelles or any of these kind of system ideologies?
Traction's great. In my framework, it's done slightly different, but my fundamental belief, particularly in small businesses, we can do a lot more than we think. And the problem is, when you have a small business even larger business, but setting realistic goals, it's what kills most businesses. Because the thing is, when you have a business with 3, 4, 5 people, you can grow a lot more than you expect, right? And the problem is, if you're setting a goal to grow 5% or 10% or something like that in a year, I'm not saying it can't work, but what I'm saying is most smaller businesses need to grow more, right? And setting aggressive goals is key, and a lot of the time they will feel unrealistic until they're achieved, right? So building a mindset, my experience is building a mindset in people that, it's not like this, but it's like this. Like a really significant increase in your achievement. It can be difficult, but it really starts with setting people clear goals and helping them figure out how to get there, or basically let them figure out how to get there. And the way I tend to do that myself personally is really, first of all, no goal is unachievable. The question is, what does it take? So if you're like, okay, we need to make 20 million next year, that's possible. Now, it might cost 100 million to get there, and that might not be feasible. But that not possible is not an option, right? So the question is always, what does it take? So the key thing that I always try and work with my teams on is basically, if we have to get from making 100K to making 1 million, what are the steps we need to take to go through that? And actually starting with the end in mind, saying, by the end of next year, if we are making 1 million, what are we doing very differently than today? Like, what have to be changed? What have to be different? What have to, like, whatever? Because most people, and it's natural, they think about the environment today, they think about what we are doing, and they're like, yeah, we can work a few extra hours, we can tweak this thing, and that will give us a few percent. But you're not looking for a few percent in a small business. You're looking to expand significantly, generally, right? And that really requires a different level of thinking. It requires people, your staff particularly, to really think outside the box. And I've always found the best way of getting people to that point is really just setting them some, let's call unrealistic goals that, where they need to come up with totally new solutions to hit them.
Yeah. So I guess my question about that would be, so we want to set them unrealistic goals. If we're the person who is at the 100K, so they might be just there, might be them plus 1 assistant, and they're looking for somebody to hire, and their budget is should be here, but it's probably here. So what's your experience of doing this with, let's say, low wage workers? Do that to be Eastern Europe, Asia, Philippines? I know you've got a lot of experience in the Philippines.
Yep. Yeah, I've managed a lot of people in Eastern Europe as well. So definitely tried it all.
Mhm.
And my experience is that, again, if you're working with the right people, it doesn't really matter too much where they're based, right? I mean, there's great people all over the world. The key thing is finding the right people wherever they are. So I've managed a lot of people in the UK, and um, no offense to the Brits, but I'd say I've definitely managed a lot of people that were not particularly um,
A
good
players.
good for the business.
Hmm.
And I would say that the focus is always finding great people wherever you are, right? So again, like my goal and the way I go around it is I go and ask people, if you have to get from A to B, what do you need, right? Go away, make a plan, tell me, what do we need? Do you need a big budget for ads? Do you need to hire 10 more people? Like, what would it take for you to get from A to B, right?
I love that question.
And the thing is, because, sometimes you'll end up in a situation where you're just like, that's not realistic. Now, just talking about goal setting, one of the key things is that goal setting have to happen on an organizational level. I see so many companies totally screw up with this. So very often they set sales a super aggressive target to, for example, double the sales.
Yeah.
But they never share that with operations or with finance or anyone else. And what happens if you, by whatever chance, suddenly have double the sales? Well, you probably need more support people. You probably need more people to deliver whatever product you're selling. And if you're not expecting that, if you've not planned for that, you get yourself into a big freaking problem. So the key thing is, when you're building a plan, it has to be built on an organizational level where you start at the top and say, okay, next year, instead of making 1 million, we're going to make 10 million, right? Now that will mean, we might need to hire some additional salespeople. We might need to spend some more marketing money. We need to look at our operations team. Now, that doesn't mean we need to 10x our operations team, but you have to be clear. So you could say, okay, well, we need to find 20% efficiency, for example. So we need to be able to find ways to do what we do today, but do it better. So that could be with automation or with templates or with solving some of the most common problems that people ask and making sure they don't need to ask them, etc. So we need to make a certain percentage efficiencies, and then we need a certain percentage of additional staff, right? Now, again, if you don't have those plans up front, you will end up in a situation where suddenly you can't manage the demand, right? And that's why it's critical to build a plan at a company level. Now, many people then ask me, well, what if we go hire more staff and then the sales doesn't appear? And the simple answer is, then you're failing. Go fix it.
Yeah. Ask them what else needs to happen.
Yeah, and but the problem is most people go the other way. They're like, yeah, I would love to double sales, so let's try and double sales, but they never prepare for it, right? And they end up in these crazy situations. And that, I worked with a company at one point that were doing a huge marketing campaign, and sales and fulfillment, the product were not talking together. So they did a huge marketing campaign for a product they had that had good profit margins. However, they didn't realize the product was out of stock and not going to be in stock for about 8-9 months. So that was a waste of a ton of money. And
What a waste.
but that's a great example of why organizations have to talk together. It's a great example of why you need to coordinate important events within the business, right? And not just let each unit operate totally in self-isolation. Right?
Yeah, I've even seen a similar thing in really, really small businesses for product-based businesses. People decide they want to double their sales, they double their sales, and they didn't plan that, oh no, we need double the inventory and 4 times the amount of cash. And then that's when people get amazing deals on investment in these type of businesses, because they're like, oh, well, we have no money, even though we're selling more than ever before, especially in products-based, over service or anything like that.
Yeah, I've actually done a course specifically on e-commerce finance with a guy who was an expert at Rob Tabraka. And exactly that, like he specialized in working with a lot of e-commerce businesses and really helping them like do cash flow forecasting and all this stuff. Because if you have one product, you can maybe manage it in your head. But if you start having 5-10 products, actually predicting like how much to order of which products and so on, if you don't have clear data and clear forecasting, you're gonna end up burning yourself. And you're either gonna be in a situation where you order too much of some products and can't afford to order others. And particularly if you sell on Amazon, running out of stock is not fun, right?
Yeah.
So you really need to know your numbers.
And I mean, there's also the risk of people not paying themselves at that point as well, where you end up with $1 million worth of inventory. I know people who've got who've had 7 figures worth of inventory and not paid themselves.
Yeah.
So like if everything goes down, then they're in a situation where they've only got $1 million worth of inventory and it costs you every month to maintain that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's super vital. And yeah, I know Rob as well. So it's a good course. I haven't done it. I assume it's good.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So I suppose one final question, I'm cognizant of your time, is about people. More people, obviously, everything's about people, isn't it? But where do you find these good people that are a good fit for your business? Say if you're in the Philippines, because lots of people like the Philippines.
Yeah, I would say generally, well, start out by taking my course. But after that, the essence is really finding great people. It's all about attitude, mindset, and mentality, right? Like, yes, if you hire a web developer, they need to be able to build a website. You don't want to pay them 3 years while they figure out how to build a website, right? But fundamentally, it's all about mindset and attitude, right? And the challenge is when you're hiring your first people, you don't really know how to look for it, right? And a lot of the time, people get blown away by resumes and CVs, and they're like, "Wow, this guy, I've been there." I mean,
has an MBA, but he can't spell his name.
Right. Yeah. Or yeah, but even sometimes the challenge can be, I've seen this happen a lot, where you hire people from a large corporations that have always been used to unlimited resources and someone who had managed hundreds and hundreds of people, and suddenly they move into a small business where you need to turn every penny, and cash flow is not just an unlimited thing, and that's very different mindset, right? And sometimes maybe someone that have managed hundreds of people in a large corporation, they are used to just managing. If they move into a smaller business, they might also become an individual contributor in certain aspects where they suddenly need to add value, and well, they still add value, but they need to add value as an individual contributor as well, and a lot of people can find that difficult, right? So the key thing is really find people. As I said, they need to be flexible, because again, small businesses, you can have so many things happen that you need people to do things that is not necessarily their core competency. Fundamentally, for me, some of my favorite recruitment areas, Dynamite Jobs, that you probably know.
I've hired 2 people off there in the past. It's good.
Yeah, so dynamitejobs.com is fantastic. I'm also a huge fan of LinkedIn for a couple of reasons. One of my key philosophies is that the best people are generally employed. And what I mean with that is that most people sit and look around at job boards. And if you look at the people actually sitting and looking at job boards, that tend to be the people who are super unhappy in their current job, or people who doesn't have a job. Now, I'm not saying that people who are unhappy in their current job is always bad employees, but let's say there's definitely a proportion of those people who are not going to be great employees, right?
For sure.
Now, if you're looking at people who are either unhappy or unemployed, everything else being equal, they're most likely not going to be the best employees, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So my experience is looking at LinkedIn, and particularly the good thing with LinkedIn is you can search very specifically for location if that's important, and you can search very specifically for skill. So if you're using certain systems, if you need someone with a particular skill set, you can search very specifically. So for example, let's say you need someone for Amazon customer service. You could actually search Amazon customer service. Now, everything else being equal, if someone have already done that in the past, that will probably save you a little bit of training and understanding and so on, and basically limit the potential risk you have in getting failing in recruitment, right? So doing that, and then one particular message that we use that works really well, we try and not headhunt people directly and say, hey, I want you to work with me, because then within 5 minutes it becomes a numbers game and say, how much are you paying? And I'm currently getting this, and they're wildly over exaggerating what they're getting right now.
Yeah.
It just becomes numbers game. But what we tend to do is say, hey, we currently have a job opening, and would you happen to know anyone that would be a good fit for this? Because I can see you have worked with Amazon customer service. Now, that both enable them to put up their hand and say, hey, that sounds interesting for me. Or it enables them to say, hey, actually, I have a friend that, who's good at this, who's actually need a job or might be looking for a new job. I'll refer them. And we tend to get a pretty equal number of hires from either people that have been referred from someone else, or people actually put their own hand up and say, that's something for me. All right. So we have found that work really well. And what we have, in the beginning, we went the very direct route and said, hey, do you want to work for us? And we found out that works really not well. So we don't ever do that anymore. But just making it an open sort of suggestion saying, hey, would you happen to know anyone that's a good fit for this role? Generally, in my mind, have worked really, really well. Now, also,
that's great. I love that message.
Yeah,
that's very good.
Also, in the Philippines specifically, Facebook is king. So if you are looking to hire, try and join some Facebook groups that are relevant to what you're looking for. All Filipinos, like even if they don't own a mobile phone, they still have Facebook. Everyone have Facebook. Everyone, like most of our employees, if they're sick, it's easier to get hold of them and through Facebook than it is on SMS or phone call, right? Like everyone's on it all the time. So yeah, Facebook groups of various job searching kinds are also pretty good for recruitment.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great. Really good tips. And I'm definitely going to try your message. We do a lot of LinkedIn outreach for sales. So, we've already got everything set up for that. So I can...
it does take a little bit of time. But again, if you have a not very high paid employee, in a couple of hours, you can send out a fair few good messages.
Yeah, I've got a LinkedIn. I personally have a LinkedIn person who just does LinkedIn all day.
Yeah.
She doesn't love LinkedIn, but I think she loves LinkedIn. She's willing to do LinkedIn all day, which is very nice, and she's very positive about it.
Yeah.
So I suppose the final question is what are you excited about at the moment? Like, what have you learned about recently, or heard about, or something you think that's a really cool idea or a cool thing that you'd get involved in if you didn't have 1,000 other shiny objects?
Right. So I'll make it Corona relevant. So what really excites me right now is all the businesses who have realized that they don't need an office. Because so many traditional businesses have always been like, we need an office, the world explode if we can't see what people are doing. And they suddenly realized, I've spoken to multiple business owners who have said, we're getting much better results with people working from home rather than in an office. And by the way, this is when people have their kids running around at home. Right? Imagine if the kids were in school and these parents could actually work uninterrupted. That would probably be even better, right? So I will promise you one thing is that you will see a lot of businesses who are going to return either to smaller offices or totally going to drop the whole office thing. And I think that's going to be very exciting unless you own commercial real estate, which I luckily don't. It's definitely not a place I would invest anytime soon. But yeah, so I think that's exciting. I think the other side of that coin, which is basically people who are realizing that they can work from home, I think is also very exciting. So more and more people realize, I could actually move back to my family in Kansas City instead of living in New York or LA or whatever. And I can actually work from Kansas City. I can make half the money and feel much richer because every cost of living is so much cheaper. And I think that will actually increase the quality of the general workforce, in my experience and my opinion, right? Because there's going to be a lot of talented people who have a lot of good background who suddenly become much more employable again, particularly in the US, but also in Europe and other countries.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, ideas that come to mind when you share that. There's a lot of opportunities for helping these people, like helping businesses find these people, helping these people relocate, training people how to work from home, indoctrinating university graduates into how to actually do a job in office. They is involved with that, the new economy.
Definitely.
So before we sign off, is there anything you'd like to share, and how can people get in contact with you?
Yeah, for sure. So mattsingers.com is the place to go. And I actually have a free webinar currently where people can learn a bit of management. So on mattsingers.com and on the front page, they can sign up. And also you have all my social channels and so on the website. And yeah, I can be found on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc.
Cool. Well, thanks, Mads. It's been super insightful for me. I know I've learned a lot. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you again soon in Saigon.
Excellent, John. Good talking to you.
Cool. Thanks, Mads.